There are few places that seem more welcoming from a distance than a lighthouse.
You see that light cutting through the darkness, and you know exactly what it means. Safety, home, someone is awake, watching the water.
Making sure you don't disappear into the night.
But what happens when the person watching never leaves?
For centuries, lighthouse keepers lived in isolation, surrounded by violent storms, treacherous waters, and shipwrecks.
And sometimes death.
They watched ships vanish into the darkness, they heard things moving through the walls, and then some of them died in the very places that they were supposed to keep safe.
And eventually, the technology changed.
The lighthouses became automated,
The keepers went home.
but some people say the lighthouses weren't empty.
So now we're heading into the darkness.
To find out what happens when the light is still burning,
But the person keeping watch may not be alive anymore.
hi, hello.
Hello.
I'm Daneisha,
I'm Ashley.
and this is
The
the Afterlife
Afterlife
Hotline.
Woo!
It has been 2 weeks
Terrifix.
since we have been here. We have been on a little hiatus.
Much needed.
Much needed, yes. And so we are back.
We're back, bitches. We're back and better than ever.
I wouldn't say that, but we're back.
You know, a girl can dream.
So, like the intro said, we're going to be talking about lighthouses. I have 3. She has, I think, 3.
Yes.
And yeah,
I'm excited.
me too. Okay, so my first one is going to be the Old Baldy Lighthouse, which is in Bald Head Island, North Carolina, which I picked it because I used to live in North Carolina. And I'm pretty sure I've been to this lighthouse for like a field trip. Because I want to say we have to take a ferry over there.
So you think you've been there on a field trip?
Yeah. I think I've been there on a field trip. I'm not 100%
yeah.
sure because I've slept many times since then. But
Man, I wish we would have gone on a field trip like that. But then again, you were on the coast.
yeah,
so-
we were on the coast. The reason I think we did a field trip is because I distinctly remember a ferry ride, and I remember collecting shells in a Ziploc bag, and they stayed outside. And you know, whenever you collect shells and then you don't open the bags for a hot ass minute. There's something about a lighthouse that feels almost designed for a ghost story. They're isolated, surrounded by water, and for hundreds of years, the people who lived inside them were essentially watching for disasters. Old Baldy on Bald Head Island, North Carolina, is the perfect example because of the history of this lighthouse gets dark before we even get into the paranormal stories. What we now call Old Baldy wasn't actually the first lighthouse built on Bald Head Island. The original Bald Head Lighthouse, say that 10 times fast, was completed in 1794 after Congress authorized construction in 1789. Its job was to guide ships safely around the mouth of the Cape Fear River and the incredibly dangerous Frying Pan Shoals.
There's just some weird names.
Yes. Unfortunately, the first lighthouse was built in a location that was slowly being consumed by erosion. All coastlines get consumed by erosion. The ocean's going to take her property back.
Yep.
By 1813, the structure had become so threatened by the sea that it was demolished. When the replacement lighthouse was constructed in 1817, they reused approximately 60,000 bricks from the original structure,
Oh, well, that's good.
along with its lantern room. So the lighthouse visitors see today is quite literally partially made from the remains of the lighthouse that came before it.
That's awesome.
And this is where the story of Henry Long comes in. Henry Long was appointed keeper of the original Bald Head Lighthouse in 1794, making him North Carolina's first lighthouse keeper. He and his family lived on the island. Then, on October 16, 1806, Henry went into the woods while his son-in-law, Joseph Swain, was hunting nearby. Swain heard something moving through the bush and believed it was an animal. He fired his gun and accidentally shot Henry Long. According to an account reproduced by the Old Baldy Foundation from the Wilmington Gazette, Long was struck in the abdomen and died almost immediately. And here's the part that I think makes the story especially haunting. The lighthouse couldn't simply stop operating because its keeper had died. Henry's widow, Rebecca Long, took over the responsibility of maintaining the light until another keeper could be appointed. We actually have correspondence from December of 1806 concerning the appointment of Harry's replacement and acknowledging that his widow had been left maintaining the station. So it wasn't just a tragic death on the island, it was a death followed immediately by surviving spouse having to continue the work and living in the lighthouse.
That seems to be a common thing.
Always. And then we have the ghost story that made... Well, get up here!
I tried to move for him and I'm not good enough. It's okay. I'm not mom. I'll let it pass.
Figure out where you want to go, broski. I have a thing to record. Can you settle?
Oh. Cutie. Yeah, you're cute or whatever.
I'll make recording difficult. You realize this.
He's like, what was that?
Ah! Okay.
Oh, good. Now I can go back to sitting the way that it was.
This is very hard to hold my iPad like this because it's huge. Then we have the ghost story that made Bald Head Island famous.
All of that for that. He's like, don't talk to me.
Loser, lame ass wannabe. Like, ew. Totally. Anyway, the ghost story that made Bald Head famous was Theodorsa Burr Alston.
Theodorsa?
Theodorsa.
Oh, that's pretty.
Could be like Theodosia, but I think it's Theodorsa.
That's pretty.
Theodorsa was the daughter of Aaron Burr and the wife of South Carolina Governor Joseph Alston. In December 1812, she boarded the schooner Patriot to travel from South Carolina toward New York. The ship disappeared, and Theodorsa was never definitely found. I think it's actually definitively. Her fate remains one of those historical mysteries that has generated thousands of theories for more than 2 centuries. Eventually, Bald Head Island developed its own version of what happened to her. According to the local folklore, Theodorsa's spirit found its way to the island. Stories described a woman in period clothing appearing along the beach or marsh, sometimes described as translucent or seemingly searching for something. The island itself still incorporates Theodorsa into its ghostly history traditions. But here's where I want to put the brakes for a second. Theodorsa isn't necessarily a ghost of Old Baldy itself. She's a ghost associated with the lighthouse and the island. It's important to make that distinction because what we can document is Henry Long's death and the history of the lighthouse. We don't actually have Theodorsa's remains. The supernatural part is where the story becomes legend and eyewitnesses became testimony. I think that's what's interesting about Old Baldy is you're doing more than simply just saying it's haunted. You have a lighthouse whose predecessor was slowly swallowed by erosion. The keeper was accidentally killed by his own son-in-law, and his widow immediately had to take over the light. Centuries of dangerous waters and shipwrecks surrounding the island, and a woman who disappeared at sea supposedly still walk the shoreline. Whether you believe in ghost stories or not, it's a hell of a story and a hell of a history to leave sitting on an island by itself.
Yeah.
So a fact for Old Baldy. Henry Long was accidentally shot by his son-in-law.
Yep.
The claim is that people report seeing a woman associated with Theodorsa. So the only actual documented death is Henry Long, and there's not reports of seeing a man.
Yeah.
They're just associating a woman whose body was lost and never found to the haunting of the island.
Right.
And that's the legend, is that her spirit walks, which I find really interesting because you have a verified death.
Well, maybe her spirit walks because her body was never found.
That's also possible. Yeah.
So it's like she never got closure or laid to rest.
Yeah.
Whereas his body was found and he was laid to rest, so he doesn't need to roam around. And what if she's roaming around looking for her body?
Oh. What if she's trying to lead people to her remains?
That's another theory.
I don't know why
Did
that
we just solve? Okay. Mine is St. Augustine is in St. Augustine, Florida. It is the St. Augustine Lighthouse.
Oh, yeah.
And before we get into the ghosts, let's talk about the lighthouse itself. The lower tower was built between 1871 and 1874 and stands about 165 feet tall. It's actually the second lighthouse to stand at this location, and the light station itself has incredibly long history.
Interesting.
I know, it's like
Yeah.
exactly like yours. The lighthouse was built to help ships navigate the dangerous waters around St. Augustine, and the property included the lighthouse keeper's house and other buildings where the people maintaining the light lived. And this is important because when people talk about the St. Augustine Lighthouse being haunted, they're not necessarily talking about one single ghost. There are several different stories associated with the property, but one of the most famous and probably the saddest involves 3 little girls. In 1873, the lighthouse was still under construction. The superintendent overseeing the construction was a man named Hezekiah Pitty, I think, who had moved to St. Augustine from Maine with his family.
Is he Amish? Because that's giving Amish.
I'm thinking so. I'm not sure. I don't know. We'll go with that. I don't know. He and his wife Mary had several children, including 3 daughters. Mary, who was 15, Eliza, who was 13, and Carrie, who was 4. And because this was 1870s, the construction site basically became the kids' playground. There was a railway cart that workers used to transport the supplies between the docks and the construction site, and the children apparently loved riding it. It was basically their version of a roller coaster. They would climb into the cart, ride it toward the water, and then bring it back up to do it again. But there was a wooden board at the end of the track that was supposed to keep the cart from going into the water. On July 10th, 1873, the 3 Pitty sisters and another young girl were riding in the cart, and this time the board wasn't there. The cart went down towards the water and flipped. The girls were trapped underneath it. A young worker named Dan Sessions witnessed what happened and rushed into the water to try to rescue them, but 3 of the girls died. And this is where the ghost story begins. The lighthouse's own museum acknowledges the tragedy and has incorporated the story into its paranormal programming. According to the lighthouse's historical account, reports of the children being heard or seen around the property became part of the site's ghost lore. And people have claimed to hear children laughing and playing around the grounds. Some visitors have reported seeing a little girl. Others have talked about footsteps, voices, or the sensation that children are nearby. And honestly, the idea of hearing children playing at an old lighthouse at night is creepy enough. But there's another story associated with the lighthouse that I think is really interesting. There are also reports of seeing a male figure associated with the lighthouse. Someone on Reddit described visiting the lighthouse and hearing someone walking behind them. They turned around, but there was nobody there. The same person said later that they heard about other people reporting similar experiences. They also mentioned reports of an old man in a uniform appearing on the gallery at the top of the tower when the lighthouse was closed, and then apparently fading away. Now, obviously, that's an anonymous personal account, so we can't really verify it. But I actually think those kinds of stories are worth talking about on a paranormal podcast because we're not saying this definitely happened. We're saying this is what someone says that they've experienced. St. Augustine has something that makes it particularly interesting for paranormal investigators. You can actually participate in nighttime paranormal investigations there. We should do it.
I agree.
The lighthouse currently offers a Dark of the Moon ghost experience where visitors hear the site's ghost stories and then explore the lighthouse, keeper's house, and the grounds in the dark. They also offer investigation-only experiences.
I want to do it.
A Flagler College student wrote about going on the Dark of the Moon tour and using an EMF meter. She said the group eventually ended up in the basement of the keeper's house. One person sat in a chair that was supposedly associated with one of the resident ghosts. As they talked and investigated, the EMF meters reportedly began lighting up around the person's shoulders and then appeared to move behind the chairs. The student also described hearing unexplained beeping in another room called the shadow room. Again, EMF readings aren't proof of ghosts. There are plenty of possible environmental explanations for electromagnetic fluctuations, but I'm going to believe it was a ghost. And then there's another account where someone who participated in a 2019 paranormal investigation, they said they were sitting in the basement with another volunteer while a guide was asking questions. At the time, they didn't hear or see anything, but later when they listened back to the recording, they believe they heard a whisper saying, "Yes," in response to one of the questions. So whether you believe the lighthouse is genuinely haunted or you think these experiences have normal explanations, there's no denying that St. Augustine has built up a pretty impressive collection of paranormal stories. And if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure this is the one that we went to.
Did it say if it was, because 3 of the 4 children died? Was it all 3 of the daughters? Oh, that's unfortunate. So the next one I want to talk about is in Cornwall, England. I picked this one because I have some family ties. But if Old Baldy and St. Augustine give us a story built around tragedy, Longship's Lighthouse in Cornwall gives us something I love a bit more, which is a lighthouse where people who lived there actually knew it had a reputation for being haunted. Longships sits roughly a mile and a half off Land's End on a group of rocks surrounded by some of the most dangerous waters on the Cornish coast. The current lighthouse was completed in 1875, replacing an earlier structure from the 18th century. When I say this was an isolated posting, I mean you were essentially living on a rock. Getting supplies, receiving relief, and simply surviving bad weather could become a serious problem. In 1896, principal keeper John Ball wrote an account of life at Longships for Trinity House, the organization responsible for keeping England's lighthouses. His description of the station already sounded like something out of a horror movie. He described the rock as extremely dangerous and explained that the waves could suddenly sweep across it, sometimes when the sea didn't even appear partially threatening from a distance. But Ball had also addressed something else, the lighthouse's reputation for being haunted. There were strange noises coming from beneath the lighthouse. Ball actually tried to explain them. His theory was that the waves were rushing through cavities in the rocks and moving large boulders underneath the station. The result was a deep, shifting sound that seemed to come from inside the building. And
That would be eerie.
I know, just sitting there hearing the rocks in the cavity. And that's what makes this so good. Ball explained that the sound was deceptive. Depending on where you were standing, it could seem as though the noise was coming directly underneath you.
Oh.
One keeper apparently became so frightened that he ran from the kitchen to the lantern room and asked the principal keeper to come downstairs. As Ball recorded it, he's at it again. So they named it whatever the noise was.
Oh.
So the lighthouse had a ghost story, but the person documenting it, John Ball, wasn't necessarily saying, yeah, it was definitely a ghost. He was trying to figure out the logical cause for it. And then you have to remember that these men were living with. Longships wasn't just spooky because of the unexplained noises. It was extremely dangerous. The surrounding rocks had a history of shipwrecks. And in 1898, the SS Blue Jacket struck the rocks near the lighthouse on a clear night. The wreck came so extremely close to the tower itself. There are also historical accounts describing deaths among the lighthouse's personnel at Longships, including keepers who were washed from the rock. One early 20th century account describes Longships as having an exceptionally grim history among other lighthouse stations, including deaths, mental illness, and an attempted suicide. And that's what makes Longships different. We don't have to decide whether the lighthouse was haunted, and we can actually show both sides of the situation. The keepers heard something, and the station had a reputation for being haunted. One keeper was frightened, but the other was geological and explanation. But if you're willing to sit there alone at 2 a.m, surrounded by the Atlantic Ocean, and you hear sounds that sounds like somebody's moving underneath your feet, I'm not sure that knowing it's a rock would make me feel better.
Yeah.
Because you got to think, then you're you're standing on something hollow. My fact for Longships is that John Ball documented such strange noises in 1896, but the claim was that keepers reported hearing unexplained sounds.
Unexplained sounds?
Well, because I was trying to say signs. Strange noises were the ghost of someone or something beneath the lighthouse, according to legend.
Okay. This one is in Maine. It is called Boone Island Lighthouse. And Boone Island is basically a tiny piece of rock sitting out in the Atlantic Ocean about 6 miles off the Maine coast.
And we have seen it.
Yes. And when I say tiny, I mean tiny. Like, tiny. The island is only a few hundred yards across. It is extremely exposed to the ocean. And the lighthouse that stands there today is 133 feet tall, making it the tallest lighthouse in Maine and one of the tallest in New England.
This is This is the one where you and I were like basically in the water and like spent like what was it like $15, and you could see it in the shoreline, or is this is the one whenever we're at the beach?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
This is the one where we're at the beach. We can see
Okay,
it.
okay, okay. Not the one that we paid to go into the water to see. Do you remember that one?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know what that one is, but this one is the one where if we're on long sands, we can just
See it.
look
Okay.
out and see
Okay.
it. Mm-hmm.
I think I knew that, but my brain wasn't registering
Well,
that.
because like you can see it some days, but then some days you can't see it.
You can definitely see it whenever you're at Fox's.
Mm-hmm. That you can. But here's the thing: the island itself has a horrifying history that goes back before the lighthouse even existed. In 1710, a British merchant ship, that was really hard for me to say for some reason, called the Nottingham Galley, ran around near Boone Island. The crew became stranded on the barren Little Rock, and they were stranded there through a brutal winter. That would fucking suck.
Yeah, it makes me think of The Shining, but obviously it's going to be 10 times worse because
Oof.
you're basically on a tiny little island.
Yeah. Imagine being stuck on a piece of rock in the middle of the Atlantic with barely any shelter and almost no food. The men were
And
exposed.
freezing cold.
Yep, the men were exposed to freezing temperatures, storms, snow, and starvation. Eventually, they became desperate enough to resort to cannibalism in order to survive. And this isn't just some modern internet horror story. The wreck and survival ordeal are documented historical events, and the contemporary accounts of the wreck have been preserved and studied. There's like a whole book on this, I'm pretty sure. The University of Chicago Press describes the crew as surviving nearly a month in sub-freezing conditions and resorting to cannibalism before rescue. The Maine Historical Society even describes the wreck as one of the sensational stories of the early 18th century involving shipwreck, mutiny, and cannibalism. So already Boone Island is terrifying. And then someone eventually decided, you know what, this place needs a lighthouse.
To be fair, it
So
probably did
they-
need a lighthouse, so they didn't wreck into it, but
And a place to stay
Yeah.
out of the weather. There was an early day marker established on the island in 1799. A more substantial light station was established in the early 1800s, but the first tower didn't exactly have an easy life. It was damaged and eventually destroyed by storms. The current granite tower was built in 1855, and even that tower has been through absolute hell. During the massive blizzard of 1978, waves and winds destroyed the keepers' quarters and other buildings. The two keepers who were on duty were basically left with nowhere safe to go except the lantern room. They survived, but the station was automated afterwards. The lighthouse itself is still standing, but the island is now incredibly difficult to access, and the lighthouse isn't open to the public. Although I do think that you can pay to take a boat out there to go around it to see it, if I'm not mistaken. So that creates an interesting problem where you're looking for paranormal experiences. There aren't hundreds of tourists going inside and reporting things. Instead, most of the stories come from people who lived or worked there and from folklore. And this is where Boone Island gets really creepy. There's a story about a lighthouse keeper who died while stationed on the island, leaving his wife behind. According to the legend, she was forced to continue tending the lighthouse after his death. Eventually, she supposedly lost her sanity and was found wandering the island. Another version of the story gives the couple's names like Lucas Bright and Catherine and says that Lucas died during a violent storm. Catherine allegedly became distraught and eventually went insane.
we've talked about that.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, because we did an episode on Maine.
Mhm.
Yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm. But here's something really important. The story is not historically verified. Researchers who have looked into it have pointed out that there isn't solid documentation confirming the supposed keeper and his wife. So this is one that you can label as Maine folklore? This is one you can label as Maine folklore rather than historical fact. But the story has persisted, and there are reports of a female apparition being seen around Boone Island. People have interpreted that figure as the grieving keeper's wife. And because Boone Island is so inaccessible, we really weren't expecting to find a first-hand paranormal account, but there was one.
Mm-hmm.
Someone on Reddit said that they visited Boone Island while it was still manned station in 1970s. They described the island as basically a pile of rocks surrounded by ocean. They said that the Coast Guard men reportedly hated being stationed there because of the isolation, and that they had heard that people occasionally developed severe cabin fever and had to be replaced. Probably what happened to the wife.
Yeah.
And then they said that it was widely rumored to be haunted. According to this person's account, men stationed there sometimes reported feeling a presence in both the keeper's quarters and the tower. They also claimed that some people said that they had seen the spirit of a dark-haired woman. And here's the detail that really got me. They said that the lighthouse itself sometimes seemed to turn on by itself. Now, the person who shared the story even acknowledged that there could have been an electrical explanation for that, but imagine being a Coast Guard worker in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by nothing but ocean, and the light suddenly turns on.
Yeah, that would
by
freak
itself.
me out.
Yeah. Nope. So, the fascinating thing about Boone Island is that we don't necessarily need to exaggerate the paranormal side. The actual history is already disturbing in itself. You have the shipwreck victims starving to death. You have a documented history of brutal storms. You have a lighthouse keeper living in extreme isolation. You have a 1978 storm that literally destroyed the buildings on the island. And then you have the legend of a woman losing her sanity after her husband died.
And cannibalism.
Whether or not the ghost is real, I can understand why people would believe something is still lingering there. So, yup.
You want to try to pronounce that?
Chifuncte. Is that right?
It's
Chifuncte?
chifuncta.
Oh, you gotta say it with the French. Chifuncta.
Well, they said to put emphasis on the funk, so I looked
Funk.
up. I looked up pronunciations. For my last lighthouse, we're heading down south because if there's one place you can put a lighthouse in the middle of dark water and add storms, isolation, and Civil War history, it's Louisiana. Louisiana. Now, I wasn't born by the coast in Louisiana. I was born in Shreveport. Really, actually, I was born in Bossier. But anyway, I picked it because Louisiana. So,
Which is hot as hell.
oh my God.
And humid.
So the Chifuncta, which we can put the way it's spelled right here, River Lighthouse, also known as the Madisonville Lighthouse, sits on Lake, I should have looked at more pronunciations, Lake Pontchartrain?
Poncatrain?
Pontchartrain?
I don't know.
We're going to go with Pontchartrain. It sits on Lake Pontchartrain near the mouth of the Chifuncta River. The station was established in 1830s to help ships navigate the lake and enter the river safely. The first keeper was Benjamin Thurston, and he apparently wasn't your stereotypical lighthouse keeper because historical accounts say he kept pet alligators around the station.
What a Louisiana thing to do. What the fuck?
They have alligator crossing signs.
Oh, of course they do.
I have seen them. We would
They kept pet alligators.
The lighthouse had a long, difficult history. It was damaged during the Civil War and eventually replaced with portions of the original structure being reused. I feel like we see that a lot with the original structures being reused in some way.
Shit, if I was a keeper of a lighthouse and I had pet alligators, I'd have a little moat. Ain't nobody getting to me.
The station had to survive some pretty brutal weather. In 1888, a major storm reportedly destroyed the surrounding buildings while leaving the lighthouse and the keeper's cottage standing. And in 2012, Hurricane Isaac caused significant damage to the historic structure. But there is one keeper whose story I really wanted to focus on. Vinzo Scorza. I'm going to need you French Creole motherfuckers to come up with some easier names to say.
Mr. V.
Honestly. According to the U.S. Coast Guard's historical records, Scorza served as a keeper from 1870 to 1872 and died while bringing his report to the Lighthouse Board in 1872. So once again, we have a documented death connected directly to the lighthouse. And then we get the ghost stories.
You know, I would like to haunt a lighthouse.
I think it would be fun.
I think so too.
And it would also be, because like, I'm sure it would be different as a ghost, but I also have a low social meter. And so being not subjected to the public eye all the time, you know what I mean? Madison Lighthouse has developed a reputation for strange lights appearing around or inside the structure. Ooh. One of the most repeated accounts involves security personnel reportedly seeing lights moving through the lighthouse, almost like someone carrying a lantern up the staircase. The really creepy part of the story is that the lighthouse had not had a keeper living there for decades. There were also reports of a male figure appearing in widows? Appearing in windows. Local paranormal traditions sometimes identify that figure as Benjamin Thurston, the lighthouse's first keeper. I'm going to put a very big asterisk on that part because we can document that he was the real lighthouse keeper and we can document the history of the station, but we cannot document saying that he died in that station. The identification of the apparition as Thurston comes from just local ghost lore, which, to be completely honest, especially down in Louisiana, if they tell you it's Benjamin Thurston, I'm going to be more than likely to believe that it's Benjamin Thurston, because then people know what they're talking about. Honestly, that leaves us with a really fun mystery because there are plenty of mundane explanations for mysterious lights around a ghost or around a lighthouse. You're looking at structures surrounded by water, boats, reflection, distant lights, shadows, and changing water. Human beings are also really good at turning ambiguous movement into something recognizable, especially in the dark.
Well, our brains like to
Rationalize.
rationalize.
It could also be something like with the Gordon lights and be gas related potentially or anything like that.
Yeah.
Natural gas related. But if the reports are accurate and someone really is seeing a light move through an empty lighthouse, then the question becomes who is carrying that lantern? Because the lighthouse hadn't had a keeper for a very long time. And that's where it gets me. A lighthouse exists because someone was supposed to be inside, awake, and watching the water. For generations, there was really a person climbing all those stairs, and then eventually people left, technology changed, and the lighthouse no longer needed them. But according to the stories, some may still be making that climb. So the fact, claim, and legend I have for the Tchefuncte River Lighthouse is that VS, because I'm not saying that name again, was a real keeper who died in 1872 while carrying a report to the Lighthouse Board. The claim there, though, is that people have reported seeing lights and figures inside the lighthouse despite there not being a keeper for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
And the man in the window is supposedly the very first keeper, Benjamin Thurston.
I believe it.
I do too.
What story were you reading on your Kindle? Because it's up.
Oh, it's the How to Survive Camping, the Lady in Chains, I think.
Interesting.
It's the third. I got the ARC for it.
Huh. Is your Kindle not going to... Is it on a charger?
It's on the charger, but it's also in sleep mode right now. So it shows, when you're reading a book, it shows the cover as its screensaver, basically.
That's cool. Huh. I'm working on it.
Mm-hmm.
Getting there.
Mm-hmm.
So, any twice. Our final lighthouse is Rose Island Lighthouse in Rhode Island. And this one is really interesting because the paranormal stories aren't just about the lighthouse itself. The entire island has a history of death, illness, military activity, and isolation. Rose Island sits in the Narragansett Bay between Newport and Jamestown. The lighthouse was built beginning in 1869 and first lit in January of 1870. It was constructed on the southwest bastion of an old fortification called Fort Hamilton. The light remained in service until 1970 when the Newport Pell Bridge made the lighthouse unnecessary as a navigational aid. But the island had a history before the lighthouse, and this is where it gets creepy. During the 1800s, parts of Rose Island were used for quarantine purposes. People suffering from diseases including cholera and yellow fever were isolated there. So imagine being sick with a potentially deadly disease, being taken to an island away from your family, away from the mainland, and being told you can't leave. And some people died there.
Sounds,
Yep. And according to local paranormal lore, some believe those people never really left. There are stories that spirits connected to the island's quarantine history still haunt the old structures. And honestly, that makes Rose Island different from St. Augustine. At St. Augustine, there's a very specific tragedy. At Rose Island, you've got layers and layers of history. Disease, isolation, military activity, lighthouse keepers, abandonment, and death. One of the most interesting historical figures associated with Rose Island was Charles S. Curtis. Curtis was a lighthouse keeper from 1887 until 1918 for more than 30 years. He and his family actually lived on the island. His grandson, Wanton Chase, lived there as a child and later helped the preservation group reconstruct what life on the island was like. The official Rose Island Lighthouse Foundation has preserved Chase's memories of living there, including how the lighthouse operated, what the family did, and what their everyday life was like. And because Curtis spent so much of his life there, it isn't surprising that one of the island's ghost stories involves him. There are reports that people have heard footsteps climbing the lighthouse stairs as the old keeper is still making his rounds. And I think that's actually one of my favorite kind of ghost stories, because I would be doing the same thing if I was a ghostie. But then we have another reported apparition, a woman in white. It's always a woman in white. Always a woman in white.
I wonder if it's because white clothes are easier to, like, be ghostly.
Maybe that, like, or like white is like purity or whatever.
Well, they might not have died in purity, though.
Well, I mean, like, you're just pure energy at that point.
Valid, yeah.
Because Mary,
yeah,
they've seen her roaming around in white. But also back then, too, I guess it could have been in, like, nightgowns or something.
Nightgowns, or it could have been, like, the underdresses.
Yeah, like a slip or something. Yeah. We should bring back slips.
They are coming back.
I know. Well, yeah, because people wear them as, like, actual dresses and stuff. This is one is particularly interesting because there doesn't seem to be a definitive historical identity attached to her. So, who is she? Could she have been a keeper's wife? More than likely. Could she have been connected to the island's quarantine history? Also very likely. Could she be somebody whose story was simply lost? Or could the whole thing be folklore? That's one of the mysteries where they really, there's really no way to know. Now, look specifically for personal accounts from people who have actually stayed on Rose Island, and here's where things get interesting. Found people who have stayed overnight there, but the accounts I found weren't necessarily paranormal. One person described staying there as almost like camping, no normal electricity, hand pump water, an outdoor shower, and the ability to kayak around the island. So, we would be set.
Yeah, primitive camping.
Yeah. Another person described it as a really peaceful and romantic place.
Maybe we don't need to go.
No. Yeah. Nope.
We've already had that confusion one too many times.
Yeah. Some people just experience it as a beautiful, isolated, historic place.
Do you want to go to a romantic island with me?
It's giving Acadia.
Mm-hmm.
If y'all have never been camping in Acadia, Maine, I definitely recommend going. But definitely bring a fucking tent pad, or like a sleeping pad, or something.
Putting the picture of me in the middle of the night when I went to the bathroom by myself, and I just looked miserable as fuck.
We were sleeping on fucking wood. Anyway.
Well, it would have been different.
And we didn't have a rain fly. But we did have No,
we were But you also have to remember that was the year we flew, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And so
we didn't have anything.
Yeah, we already were limited in what we had. And then when we were at the camper,
rough sleep.
We were already also restricted. So
yeah, that was rough.
But
it was fun.
Yeah, I was gonna say, but we can say we've been to Acadia.
Yeah. It wasn't even really that bad sleeping. I mean, it was physically rough, but like it wasn't scary or anything.
No.
It was dark as
I
fuck.
literally walked to the bathroom by myself.
Yeah.
The only thing I didn't
It's more scary in fucking Woolly Hollow than it was out in Acadia.
The only thing I didn't like is that, and I get it, but the bathrooms were literally just like, you could see the open ground.
Slats of wood.
And so I'm like,
my fear would be looking down to see someone like
staring up. Yeah. That was the only thing I really didn't like. But otherwise, I felt safe.
Yeah, it wasn't that bad.
And I want to say the breakfast in the little shop was pretty.
Oh yeah, we got like little scones or something, like blueberry scones. There are paranormal sources that attribute activity on Rose Island to the people who died there during quarantine, as well as possibly former keeper Charles Curtis. Reported experiences include hearing voices and footsteps, and there has even been a claim involving a photograph that allegedly captured a strange reflection interpreted as a ghost. But even the source reporting those stories acknowledges that they're anecdotal and largely unverifiable. And that's where I think this one gets really interesting, because if you were staying overnight at Rose Island and heard footsteps coming up the lighthouse stairs, I think it's a ghost.
I think it's a ghost.
Yep. So, yeah.
Maybe that's the strangest thing about Lighthouse.
They're built to keep people from getting lost in the darkness.
They're supposed to be symbols of safety, guiding ships away from danger and bringing them home.
But after hearing these stories,
I'm not so sure I'd feel particularly safe walking into one after dark.
because maybe the footsteps are just old wood settling.
Maybe that voice is the wind.
Maybe that light moving across an empty room is just a reflection from the water.
Or maybe some places hold on to the people who spent their lives watching the sea.
And if that's true,
Maybe when the light comes on at night, it's not just guiding the ships home.
maybe someone is still watching. Definitely let us know if you guys have been to a lighthouse, if you guys have experienced anything in a lighthouse, or have any other creepy lighthouses that you want us to talk about.
You can email us at theafterlifehotline@gmail.com or comment or DM us on any of these social medias here.
Hell yeah.
We would love to hear what you have to say.
Yes.
And if that is all,
that is all. But thank you, Tab. You ready?
keep one foot in the living world.
And 1 year on the line.
Bye. Fuck you, Tab.